A woman's voice trembles over the sound of pouring rain. "I'm filthy, inside and out," she whispers, standing alone on a freezing city street, covered in dirt and shame. She thinks no one will ever look at her the same again, until a powerful billionaire stops and doesn't see a beggar. He sees something different. He offers her a room, a meal, a chance. But when her past explodes across the news, the world calls her a liar, a fraud, a woman who fooled a man worth billions. Now he's risking everything to protect the one person everyone else calls trash, and she's fighting to prove she's not who they say she is. Because sometimes the dirtiest hands hold the purest hearts. Music swells. But what happens when the truth finally comes out? And the world learns why she really said, "I'm filthy, inside and out." Will his faith in her survive the storm, or will love be the only thing too fragile to clean? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The fluorescent lights of the gas station bathroom flickered overhead as Summer Brown stared at her reflection in the scratched mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, telling the story of too many sleepless nights on Chicago's unforgiving streets. Her once steady hands that had carefully administered medicine and brought comfort to patients, now trembled as she scrubbed them raw under the lukewarm water. "I'm filthy, inside and out," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ancient ventilation system. The words felt like stones in her throat, heavy with the weight of shame and regret. The sleeve of her donated sweater slipped down as she reached for a paper towel, revealing layers underneath. A t-shirt, long-sleeve thermal, whatever she'd managed to collect from various charity bins. Everything she owned now carried the sharp scent of bleach, a reminder of the cleaning jobs she took whenever someone would hire her without asking too many questions. Her worn backpack sat at her feet, the strap hanging by a few stubborn threads. Through the bathroom's grimy window, she could hear the steady drumbeat of cold rain hitting the pavement outside. Chicago's autumn weather showed no mercy to those without shelter. The gas station clerk's suspicious gaze followed her as she made her way through the aisles. Summer felt her cheeks burn with shame as she slipped a packet of crackers into her pocket, her stomach twisting with both hunger and guilt. She'd never stolen before losing everything. Now survival meant compromising the values she'd once held dear. Pushing through the glass doors, Summer stepped out into the rain-soaked night. The water immediately began seeping through her worn shoes, each step accompanied by a quiet squish. She pulled her thin jacket tighter, though it did little to ward off the chill. A massive billboard loomed above the street, illuminated despite the darkness. The image showed a glittering charity gala with Langford Holdings' annual benefit written in elegant script across the top. In the center stood Diego Langford himself, Chicago's mysterious billionaire philanthropist. His smile seemed to mock her from above. Perfect white teeth, expertly tailored suit, not a hair out of place. "Must be nice," Summer muttered, staring up at his image. The man probably spent more on a single meal than she had to her name. A passing car roared through a puddle, sending a spray of muddy water across her skirt. She jumped back, but not quickly enough to avoid the splash. Perfect, just perfect. Looking down at her now mud-spattered clothes, Summer felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away quickly. Crying wouldn't help anything. The temperature was dropping with each passing minute, and she needed to find somewhere warm to wait out the worst of the night. The lights of the Grand Palmer Hotel beckoned from down the street. It was the kind of place she would have never dreamed of entering in her current state, but desperation made her bold. The lobby would be warm, and if she was lucky, she might be able to find an out-of-the-way corner to rest for a little while before security noticed her. Summer took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and tried to walk with purpose as she approached the hotel's revolving doors. The gleaming brass and polished marble seemed to belong to another world entirely, one she used to be part of, before everything fell apart. She slipped through the door, trying to make herself as small and inconspicuous as possible. The blast of warm air that greeted her almost made her knees buckle with relief. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over the expansive lobby, their light reflecting off the pristine floor. Well-dressed guests milled about, none of them sparing her a second glance, or perhaps deliberately avoiding looking at her at all. Finding a quiet corner near a large potted palm, Summer sank into one of the plush chairs, her muscles aching from hours of walking. She didn't know this was the very hotel owned by the man whose face she'd just seen on the billboard, Diego Langford himself. She just knew it was warm, and for the moment, that was enough. The packet of crackers felt heavy in her pocket, a reminder of how far she'd fallen. Once she'd been the one helping others. Now she couldn't even help herself. The stolen food would barely take the edge off her hunger, but it was better than nothing. Summer closed her eyes just for a moment, letting the warmth of the lobby seep into her tired bones. The sound of laughter from a group of well-heeled guests made her eyes snap open again. They passed by, the women in designer dresses and the men in expensive suits, smelling of costly perfumes and success. Summer shrunk deeper into her chair, acutely aware of her mud-stained clothes and the lingering scent of bleach that clung to her skin. A uniformed security guard glanced in her direction, and Summer's heart began to race. She knew she couldn't stay long. People like her weren't welcome in places like this. But the thought of heading back out into the cold rain made her want to weep. Just a few more minutes, she told herself. Just a few more minutes of warmth and pretending she belonged somewhere. The grand lobby clock ticked away the seconds, each one a reminder that she was an intruder in this world of luxury. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the rain still falling steadily, turning Chicago's streets into rivers of reflected neon light. Summer hugged her backpack close, its meager contents representing everything she had left in the world. Her gaze drifted to a large portrait hanging on the lobby wall. Another image of Diego Langford, this one showing him at what appeared to be a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Even in this formal photograph, there was something distant in his eyes, a hint of sadness that the photographer hadn't quite managed to capture. Or maybe she was just projecting her own pain onto a stranger's face. The crackers in her pocket seemed to burn against her leg, a constant reminder of her transgression. She'd have to find somewhere else to eat them, somewhere private where she wouldn't have to feel the weight of judging eyes. But for now, she allowed herself to sink into the soft chair, soaking in the warmth and pretending, just for a moment, that she wasn't completely alone in the world. The lobby's elegant clock continued its steady march forward, each tick echoing the beating of her heart. Summer knew she couldn't stay much longer, but she allowed herself to memorize every detail of this brief respite, the softness of the chair, the warmth of the air, the gentle murmur of conversation around her. These moments of comfort would have to sustain her through whatever awaited her back on the cold streets of Chicago. The warmth of the hotel lobby wrapped around Summer like a comforting blanket, but she couldn't let her guard down completely. From her spot near the large potted fern, she had a clear view of the entire space while remaining partially hidden from curious eyes. The marble floors gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, and the soft music playing through hidden speakers almost made her forget about her growling stomach. 38 floors above, Diego Langford stood at the window of his private office suite, his reflection ghosting against the rain-streaked glass. The city lights blurred beneath the downpour, much like his memories of Elena had started to blur around the edges. He straightened his perfectly pressed tie, a habit that helped him maintain control when thoughts of his late wife threatened to overwhelm him. Below him, hotel staff scurried about like worker bees, preparing for tonight's charity dinner. The event would raise money for mental health awareness, a cause that felt like both a tribute and a wound. Elena had been passionate about helping others with depression, even as she fought her own battles in silence. "Mr. Langford." His assistant appeared at the door. "They're ready for your final approval downstairs." Diego nodded, his composed expression never wavering. He'd mastered the art of appearing unaffected, though the weight of grief still pressed against his chest like a physical thing. The elevator carried him down to the lobby, each floor bringing him closer to the evening's responsibilities. Another night of smiling, shaking hands, and pretending he didn't see Elena's face in every crowd. The lobby bustled with activity as servers carried trays of glasses and decorators made final adjustments to elaborate flower arrangements. Diego's sharp eyes caught every detail, the precise angle of each place card, the perfect spacing between chairs. Control was comfort. Perfection was protection. A sudden commotion near the center of the lobby drew his attention. A champagne bottle had slipped from a server's hands, sending expensive bubbles across the pristine marble floor. Before anyone could react, a woman appeared with paper towels, dropping to her knees to clean the spill. Diego frowned. Her clothes didn't match the hotel uniform, and her movements, while efficient, lacked the polish he expected from his staff. He approached, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "This isn't acceptable. Where is your supervisor?" Summer looked up, her heart pounding. She'd only been trying to help, to maybe earn a few dollars or at least justify her presence in the lobby. The man standing over her was the same one from the billboard, tall, imposing in his perfectly tailored suit, with dark eyes that held shadows she recognized all too well. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured, keeping her head down as she continued to mop up the spill. The room had started to spin slightly, but she forced herself to focus on the task. How many hours had it been since she'd eaten anything substantial? "This is the kind of thing that reflects poorly on the entire establishment," Diego continued, his words clipped and professional. "If you're going to work here, you need to—" The rest of his sentence was cut short as Summer suddenly swayed, the paper towels falling from her trembling hands. The marble floor rushed up to meet her as consciousness slipped away like water through her fingers. The lobby erupted in startled gasps and concerned murmurs. Diego reacted instinctively, dropping to one knee beside the fallen woman. Her face, relaxed in unconsciousness, struck him with unexpected force. Despite the obvious signs of exhaustion and hardship, the dark circles under her eyes, the hollow cheeks, there was something eerily peaceful about her expression. It reminded him of Elena in those rare moments when sleep had granted her reprieve from her demons. "Call. Medical!" he ordered, his voice sharp but steady. "And clear the lobby. Give her some space." He noticed details now that he'd missed in his earlier irritation. The worn backpack clutched in her arms, the layers of mismatched clothing, the faint smell of bleach that spoke of desperate attempts to stay clean. This was no employee. The realization sat uncomfortably in his chest, mixing with memories of Elena's passionate speeches about helping those in need. The woman's breathing was steady, but her skin felt cool to the touch. Diego shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her still form, aware of the irony. This small gesture of kindness coming only after she'd lost consciousness. The ghost of Elena's voice seemed to whisper in his ear. "Sometimes, Diego, the people who need help the most are the ones who never ask for it." Staff members hovered anxiously nearby, unsure how to handle this disruption to their carefully orchestrated evening. Diego remained kneeling beside the unconscious woman, struck by the strange tableau they must present. The billionaire and the homeless woman, sharing the same marble floor in his pristine lobby. The sound of approaching sirens filtered through the rain-streaked windows. Diego found himself studying the woman's face, trying to understand why her peaceful expression in the midst of obvious suffering affected him so deeply. Perhaps because it was the opposite of Elena, who had maintained a perfect facade while darkness consumed her from within. The medical team would arrive any moment. Soon this woman would become someone else's responsibility, and Diego could return to his organized, controlled world of charity galas and business meetings. Yet something about her presence had cracked the careful veneer he'd constructed around himself, letting in echoes of emotions he'd worked hard to suppress. He remained by her side, his expensive suit collecting dust from the marble floor, waiting for help to arrive. The lobby lights cast soft shadows across her face, and for a moment the lines between past and present, between wealth and poverty, between guilt and redemption, seemed to blur like the rain-streaked city beyond the windows. Consciousness returned to Summer like waves lapping at a shore. The first thing she noticed was softness, a foreign sensation after months of sleeping on concrete and park benches. Her fingers traced what felt like 1,000 thread-count sheets, so different from the rough blankets at the shelter. A gentle beeping drew her attention. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself in a room that seemed to glow with understated luxury. Warm light filtered through cream-colored curtains, casting a gentle sheen on wood-paneled walls. A medical monitor stood beside the bed, its steady rhythm marking her heartbeat. "Oh, good, you're awake." Summer startled at the voice, instinctively pulling the covers up to her chin. A woman in a crisp white uniform stood in the doorway, her smile, professional but kind. "I'm Nancy, the hotel's nurse. How are you feeling?" I shouldn't be here," Summer whispered, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Her gaze landed on her worn backpack, propped against a nearby chair. At least they hadn't taken that away. "Mr. Langford insisted," Nancy said, checking the monitor readings. "He had you brought to one of our medical recovery suites. We keep them ready for guests who might need observation." She made some notes on a tablet. "Your blood sugar was dangerously low. When was the last time you ate properly?" Summer's silence was answer enough. "Well, Mr. Langford has arranged for all your meals while you recover. Speaking of which..." Nancy gestured to a covered tray on a side table. "Breakfast was delivered an hour ago. It should still be warm." The smell of eggs and bacon made Summer's stomach clench painfully, but shame kept her from reaching for the food. "I can't pay for any of this. It's already taken care of." Nancy's voice was gentle but firm. "Your only job right now is to rest and get your strength back." Before Summer could protest further, a knock at the door made both women turn. Diego Langford stood in the doorway, as impeccably dressed as he'd been the night before. His expression was carefully neutral, but Summer could sense his discomfort. "How is our guest?" he asked Nancy, though his eyes stayed on Summer. "Stable now, sir, though she needs rest and proper nutrition." Diego nodded, then addressed Summer directly. "I trust the accommodations are satisfactory?" Summer's fingers twisted in the sheets. "You didn't have to do this. I'm sorry about the lobby. I was just trying to help with the spill. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Is that why you were cleaning? Just trying to help?" His tone was skeptical. "Yes." She lied, hating how easily the deception came. "I saw the mess and I didn't want anyone to slip." She couldn't tell him she'd been hoping to earn a few dollars, or at least justify her presence in the warm lobby. Diego studied her for a long moment, and Summer felt stripped bare under his gaze. She clutched her backpack closer, certain that any minute he'd see through her, lie, and have security escort her out. "Well," he said finally, "you need to rest. Nancy will see to anything you need." He turned to leave, then paused. "And miss, please eat something. The food isn't charity, it's medical necessity." After he left, Summer picked at the breakfast tray, each bite both heavenly and haunting. The food settled uneasily in her stomach, rich fare for someone used to gas station crackers and soup kitchen meals. As evening fell and the bustle of the hotel quieted, restlessness drove Summer from her bed. Her legs were steady now, and she found herself drawn to explore the silent corridors. The hotel transformed at night, its luxury more approachable in the dim lighting. She wandered the halls like a ghost, trailing her fingers along textured wallpaper, studying original paintings in gilded frames. This was a world she'd never imagined touching, one she'd sneered at just yesterday from the rain-soaked street. Her feet carried her to the penthouse level, where a comfortable lounge area invited quiet contemplation. Moonlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, silvering the elegant furniture. As she moved through the space, something caught her eye. A book left on a side table. It was a Bible, worn with use, its leather cover soft and creased. Gold letters spelled out Elena Langford on the cover. Summer's hand trembled as she opened it, finding it already marked to a particular passage. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18. The words seemed to glow in the moonlight. "Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow." "Though your sins are like scarlet," Summer whispered, the words falling from her lips like tears. She'd heard this verse before, but tonight it felt different, like a message meant specifically for her. Her fingers traced the name on the cover again. Elena Langford. Diego's wife? The woman's Bible felt warm in her hands, as if it still held the faith of its owner. For a moment, Summer stood frozen in the moonlit lounge, holding a stranger's Bible, while the promise of those words wrapped around her heart. White as snow. Was that possible? Could anyone be made that clean again? The sound of distant footsteps startled her from her reverie. Carefully, she placed the Bible exactly as she'd found it and slipped back to her room. But the words followed her, whispering of a hope she'd thought forever lost. The medical monitor's steady beeping welcomed her back, but now it seemed to pulse in time, with the verse echoing in her mind. Though your sins are like scarlet, white as snow, white as snow. Morning light streamed through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Diego Langford stepped out of the elevator, his mind already racing through the day's meetings. He stopped short at the sound of quiet movement in the kitchenette. Summer Brown stood at the counter, methodically wiping every surface with careful attention. Her borrowed clothes hung loose on her thin frame, but her movements were precise and focused. She hadn't noticed him yet, and Diego observed how she checked each corner, ensuring no spot was missed. "Miss Brown?" She startled, nearly dropping the cleaning cloth. "Mr. Langford, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be up here. I wanted to—" Her words tumbled out in a rush of embarrassment. "Why are you cleaning?" His voice was neutral, curious rather than accusatory. Summer's hands twisted the cloth. "It makes me feel useful," she said quietly, looking down. "After everything you've done, I needed to do something." Diego studied her for a long moment. There was something familiar in her need to help, to find purpose in service. It reminded him painfully of Elena, who'd spent countless hours at homeless shelters, always saying that giving was its own kind of healing. "Would you like a real job here?" The words surprised even him. Summer's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What? We have a staff assistance program. It provides employment opportunities along with support services." Diego moved to the coffee maker, keeping his tone businesslike. The position would include regular hours, benefits, and housing assistance. But I don't have references, or proper documents, or... She trailed off, overwhelmed. Those can be arranged through the program. He poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one toward her. Would you like breakfast while we discuss the details? 20 minutes later, they sat at the penthouse's small breakfast table. Summer ate slowly, savoring each bite of the eggs and toast as if they were the finest delicacies. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered repeated thank yous between bites. Diego watched her, remembering Elena's stories about the people she'd met at the shelters, how a simple meal could mean so much. He'd written the checks, but Elena had known the faces, the stories, the humanity behind the numbers. His phone buzzed. Patricia Morris, his HR manager, demanding an immediate meeting. He excused himself, leaving Summer to finish her breakfast. Mr. Langford, this is highly irregular, Patricia declared the moment he entered her office. We have protocols, procedures. We can't just hire someone off the street without proper vetting. The staff assistance program exists precisely for cases like this. Diego countered calmly. But we know nothing about her. She could be dangerous. She could be exactly who needs this opportunity. His voice was firm. Process the paperwork, Patricia. That's final. Back upstairs, Summer had not only finished breakfast, but had cleaned the entire kitchenette again. Diego handed her a folder containing employment forms. Report to HR at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. They'll get you started. Her hands trembled as she took the folder. Thank you, Mr. Langford. I don't deserve... Everyone deserves a chance. He interrupted gently. Later that afternoon, Summer stood nervously in the staff locker room, clutching her new employee badge. The other workers eyed her with mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She heard their whispers. Where did she come from? Must know somebody important. Probably won't last a week. But not everyone was unkind. Maria from housekeeping approached with a spare uniform, perfectly pressed. Here, Carida, this should fit you. The older woman's smile was warm, motherly. Tom, the maintenance supervisor, showed her where to find fresh towels and supplies. Don't let them get to you, he muttered. Everyone's got a story. Most touching was the small package she found in her locker at the end of her first shift. A bar of lavender soap wrapped in tissue paper. The note attached read simply, Welcome to the team. Sarah front, desk. But it was the envelope from Diego that made her hands shake. Inside was her first week's pay advance and a brief note. Your past does not define your future. That night, in her small hotel room, now officially staff housing, Summer knelt beside her bed. The lavender soap's gentle scent filled the air as she clasped her hands. Dear God, she whispered, I'm not asking for riches or comfort. Just, please give me strength. Strength to stay clean. Strength to be worthy of this chance. She touched her employee badge, still amazed by its reality. And thank you for Mr. Langford. Help me prove he wasn't wrong to trust me. The words from Elena's Bible came back to her. Though your sins are like scarlet. Maybe, just maybe, she could begin to believe in that promise of renewal. Not because she deserved it, but because sometimes grace came in unexpected forms, like a job offer from a stranger who saw something in her she couldn't yet see in herself. The evening settled around her, bringing with it not the usual dread of finding shelter, but a cautious hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself. For tonight, that was enough. The days melted into a steady rhythm at the Langford Hotel. Summer's presence became as natural as the morning sunlight streaming through the lobby's tall windows. She moved through her duties with quiet grace, transforming chaos into order, one room at a time. The other staff members gradually warmed to her. Maria from housekeeping taught her the tricks of turning down beds with hospital corners. Tom showed her how to spot maintenance issues before they became problems. Even Patricia from HR softened her initial skepticism when she saw Summer's dedication. Diego found himself lingering in the staff areas more often than usual. Sometimes he'd offer practical advice about hotel operations. Other times he'd simply sit in companionable silence while Summer organized the supply closet or folded linens. "You don't have to check on me," Summer said one morning as she restocked towels. "I know," Diego replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Maybe I just appreciate the quiet." She understood. In a world of board meetings and charity galas, sometimes silence was the greatest luxury. One Tuesday afternoon, Summer pushed her cleaning cart into Suite 412. The corporate guest, a pharmaceutical executive named Richard Matthews, was supposed to be in meetings all day. But as she entered, he stood by the window, phone to his ear. "Sorry, sir," Summer said softly. "I can come back later." Matthews turned, his expression shifting from annoyance to recognition. His eyes widened. "Wait a minute." He ended his call, staring at her intently. "I know you. You're that nurse, from Chicago Children's Hospital." The bottle of cleaning spray slipped from Summer's hand, clattering on the marble floor. Her heart thundered in her chest. 2 years ago, Matthews continued, pulling out his tablet. "I remember the case. My company supplied medications to that hospital." His fingers moved across the screen until he found what he was looking for. "Here it is. Nurse suspended for negligence in child's death." Summer's legs trembled. The headlines she'd tried so hard to escape were rushing back. The 6-year-old patient, the wrong medication dosage, the investigation, her resignation. "I need to go," she whispered, backing toward the door. But it was already too late. Matthews had shared his discovery with his colleagues. By afternoon, whispers raced through the hotel's corridors. Housekeepers who'd been friendly that morning now avoided her gaze. Front desk staff huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. The journalists arrived before sunset. They gathered outside the hotel entrance, cameras ready, hungry for a story about the disgraced nurse working at billionaire Diego Langford's prestigious hotel. Summer retreated to the supply closet, her sanctuary, but even there she couldn't escape. Her phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers. News websites were already running the story. Diego found her there, sitting on an overturned bucket, her face buried in her hands. "Summer." His voice was quiet but firm. "We need to talk." She followed him to his office, where the evening sun cast long shadows across the floor. On his desk, multiple newspapers' websites showed variations of the same headline. "Tell me the truth," he said, not unkindly. "All of it." Summer's hands twisted in her lap. "I didn't do it," she whispered. "The medication error, it wasn't me." Tears slid down her cheeks. "But I couldn't let them blame Sarah." Sarah. The other nurse. She had 3 kids, a sick mother she was supporting. She made the mistake, but it would have destroyed her whole family. Summer wiped her eyes. "I was single, no dependents, so I took the blame." "You sacrificed your career to protect her?" Summer nodded. "The hospital suspended me. The nursing board investigated. I resigned before they could revoke my license." Her voice cracked. "I thought I could find other work, but the story followed me everywhere. No one would hire me. I lost my apartment, my savings, everything." Diego's phone rang. The chairman of his board wanted an emergency meeting. In the conference room, stern faces greeted him. "This is a PR nightmare," the chairman declared. "We can't have someone with her history working here, the liability alone." "She's innocent," Diego interrupted. "That's not the point. The media is painting her as a negligent nurse who endangered a child, and now you're harboring her? The headlines write themselves. We have to protect the hotel's reputation, another board member added. She needs to go. Diego returned to find Summer in her small room, stuffing clothes into her worn backpack. I'll leave, she said before he could speak. I'm so sorry for bringing this trouble to your door. You've been so kind, and I've ruined everything. Summer, stop! She shook her head, tears falling. I'm filthy. The headlines are right. I let that little girl die. I let everyone believe. Not to me. Diego's voice was firm. He crossed the room and gently took the backpack from her hands. You're not filthy to me, but your hotel, your reputation, are worth nothing if I can't protect someone who sacrificed everything to help another person. He set the backpack down. You're staying. I'll tell security personally. No matter what headlines they print, this is your home now. Summer stared at him, seeing not the billionaire from the billboard, but a man who understood sacrifice and pain. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk so much for me? Diego was quiet for a moment. Because 2 years ago, I couldn't save someone who needed help. But today I can. Outside, cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions. But in that small room, 2 broken people found a moment of peace, understanding that sometimes redemption comes not in grand gestures, but in simple acts of faith in another's worth. The evening settled around them, the chaos of the day fading into quiet. Summer's backpack remained unpacked, a symbol of belonging rather than escape. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more headlines, more battles. But for now, in this moment, she was home. Not because she deserved it, but because someone chose to see beyond her past to who she could become. The afternoon sun hung low in the Chicago sky as Diego led Summer through the hotel's service entrance. Camera flashes still flickered at the main doors, but his security team had cleared this quiet path. Summer clutched her backpack close, her shoulders tense with each step. We're going somewhere safe, Diego said softly, guiding her toward a sleek black SUV. Somewhere you can breathe. The vehicle's tinted windows sealed them away from prying eyes. Summer sank into the leather seat, exhaustion etched across her face. Diego slipped into the driver's seat himself, surprising her. You drive? She asked quietly. A slight smile touched his lips. Some things I prefer to do myself. He turned the key, and the engine purred to life. It helps me think. They merged into traffic, leaving the chaos of downtown behind. Summer watched the city buildings thin out into suburbs, then into open countryside. The radio played softly, gospel music filling the comfortable silence between them. The familiar melodies wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and she found her fingers tapping gently against her knee. You know these songs? Diego asked, noticing her movement. From church, growing up. She answered. Before, everything. The landscape transformed as they drove north, urban sprawl giving way to rolling hills dressed in autumn splendor. Trees lined the highway in shades of gold, amber, and deep russet. Summer pressed her forehead against the cool window, drinking in the colors she hadn't properly seen in years. Living on the streets, survival had consumed her world. There hadn't been time to notice beauty. After 2 hours, they turned onto a private road that wound through thick woods. When they emerged, Summer's breath caught. Before them stretched Lake Geneva, its waters reflecting the late afternoon sky like polished silver. And there, commanding the shoreline, stood Diego's estate. The mansion was graceful rather than imposing, natural stone and warm wood rising 3 stories high, with wide windows that seemed to welcome the lake view inside. Gardens stretched out on either side, though the beds lay dormant now, waiting for spring. "It's beautiful," Summer whispered. Diego parked near the front steps. "It was Elena's favorite place," he said quietly. "My wife, she loved it here most in autumn." Inside, the house was just as welcoming. Comfortable furniture in rich earth tones, artwork that caught the eye without overwhelming it, and everywhere, those stunning lake views. A housekeeper named Martha showed Summer to a guest room larger than any apartment she'd ever had. "The bathroom's through there," Martha said kindly. "Fresh towels on the counter, and I've laid out some warm clothes that should fit you." Summer's eyes filled with tears at such simple kindnesses. When she was alone, she stood in the middle of the room, almost afraid to touch anything. The bed was piled with soft blankets in cream and sage green. A window seat looked out over the lake. Everything spoke of peace. After a hot shower that seemed to wash away more than just physical dirt, Summer dressed in the clothes Martha had left, soft grey pants and a warm sweater that felt like a hug. She found her way back downstairs, following the smell of something delicious cooking. The kitchen was all warm wood and gleaming copper, with a massive stone fireplace at one end. Diego stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. "You cook too?" Summer asked, surprised again. He nodded. "Another thing I prefer to do myself, especially here." He gestured to a stool at the counter. "Sit. You look steadier now." "I feel steadier." She watched him ladle rich beef stew into bowls, place crusty bread on plates. "Thank you. For everything." They ate at the kitchen counter, the simple meal tasting better than any restaurant fare. Through the windows, they could see the sun setting over the lake, painting the sky in passionate pinks and golds. "I haven't watched a sunrise without being afraid in years," Summer admitted suddenly, breaking a long, comfortable silence. "Without wondering where I'd sleep that night, or if I'd eat that day." She stirred her stew, not meeting his eyes. "It's strange to think I might see tomorrow's sunrise and just appreciate it." Diego was quiet for a moment. "Maybe it's time you did exactly that." He stood, carrying their empty bowls to the sink. "Elena's garden is still out there, though it needs work. If you'd like to help restore it, it's yours to tend." Summer's heart lifted at the thought of growing things again, of helping beauty return to a neglected space. It felt like a metaphor for her own life. Later that night, in her room, Summer knelt by the window seat. The lake was silver in the moonlight, peaceful and eternal. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to beg God for rescue or forgiveness. Instead, her prayer was simple. "Thank you. Thank you for peace. Thank you for second chances. Thank you for people who see past the surface to the truth beneath." She stayed there a long time, watching the moon's path across the water, feeling the quiet settle into her soul. Here, far from the city's judgment and chaos, she could finally begin to believe that her story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. The house creaked and settled around her, comfortable sounds that spoke of shelter rather than threat. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called softly. Summer wrapped herself in one of the soft blankets and curled up on the window seat, not ready to sleep yet. After years of constant vigilance, the luxury of simply being still, of feeling safe, was almost overwhelming. Through the window, she could see the garden Diego had mentioned. Even in the moonlight, she could tell it needed love, the kind of patient, gentle care that could bring life back to dormant things. Like her own heart, she thought, like her own spirit. Both needed tending, needed someone to believe they could bloom again. The gospel songs from their drive echoed in her memory, songs of redemption, of grace, of new mornings after long nights. For the first time in years, she let herself believe their promises might be true, not just for others, but for her too. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at the Lake Geneva estate. Summer rose with the sun each morning, wrapping herself in a warm cardigan before heading out to Elena's garden. The space had grown wild in its abandonment, roses tangled with weeds, paths disappeared under creeping vines, and fallen leaves blanketed everything in a damp carpet. But Summer saw the beauty waiting to be uncovered. She started small, clearing one section at a time, carefully distinguishing the precious plants from the invasive ones. Her hands, once precise with medical instruments, now learned the texture of soil and the delicate work of pruning. From his office window, Diego watched her work. Something in her patient dedication stirred memories he'd tried to bury, Elena kneeling in that same garden, talking to her roses as if they were friends. But where those memories once brought sharp pain, now they carried a gentler ache. He noticed how Summer would stop sometimes, close her eyes, and lift her face to the sun. How she handled each plant with such care, as if helping it heal. The walls he'd built around his heart, made of charitable foundations and hospital wings, began to show hairline cracks. They fell into the habit of sharing lunch on the wide wraparound porch. Martha would bring out sandwiches and hot soup, then discreetly disappear, leaving them to their quiet conversations. "My mama had a garden too," Summer said one mild afternoon, warming her hands around a mug of tea. "Nothing fancy like this, just a little patch behind our apartment building in Chicago, but she grew the most beautiful zinnias you ever saw." She smiled at the memory. She said flowers were God's way of reminding us that beauty can grow anywhere, even in concrete. "She sounds wise," Diego said softly. "She was. Still is, I suppose, though I haven't seen her since—" Summer's voice trailed off. She set down her mug carefully. "Since everything happened at the hospital, I couldn't face her disappointment." Diego waited, giving her space to continue if she chose. "Mama raised me on faith and hard work," Summer went on, her voice quiet but steady. "Got me through nursing school working 2 jobs. She was so proud when I graduated, when I got that position in pediatrics." She blinked back tears. "I loved that job. Loved those kids. And then—" "Tell me," Diego said gently. "The whole story this time." Summer took a deep breath. "There was this little boy, Marcus, 8 years old, fighting leukemia like a warrior. I wasn't even on duty that night, but I'd stopped by to read him a story before heading home. Sarah, the other nurse, she was new, overwhelmed. She grabbed the wrong medication from the cart." Summer's hands twisted in her lap. "I saw her face when she realized what she'd done. She had 3 kids at home, was already on probation for a minor mistake. One more strike, and she'd lose everything." "So you took the blame," Diego said, understanding dawning. "I did. I don't know what I thought, that God would somehow make it right, that the truth would come out." She wiped her eyes. "But Sarah never came forward. The hospital needed someone to blame. The family needed someone to sue. I lost my license, my savings, everything. But worst of all, I lost my faith. How could God let an innocent child die? How could he let the truth stay buried?" Diego was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Elena asked similar questions." It was the first time he'd spoken his wife's name without that edge of pain. "She struggled with depression for years. I thought I could fix it with money, the best doctors, the finest treatments. I didn't understand that sometimes the deepest wounds are invisible." He looked out over the lake. The morning I lost her, she'd been in this garden. The note she left said she felt closest to God here, but she couldn't hear his voice anymore through the darkness. Summer reached across the table and took his hand. They sat in understanding silence as the autumn wind rustled through the trees. That night, a sudden storm swept in from the lake. Thunder shook the windows, and rain pounded against the roof. Summer stood at her window, watching lightning illuminate the garden she'd worked so hard to restore. "The garden!" she gasped, remembering the newly planted seedlings. Without thinking, she ran downstairs and out into the storm. She found Diego already there, trying to shelter some young plants with makeshift covers. Together they worked in the rain, saving what they could. When the worst of the storm passed, they stood drenched and muddy, surveying the damage. "Some of it will need replanting," Summer said, pushing wet hair from her face. "Then we'll replant." Diego replied simply. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his heart. "Would you pray with me?" Summer's eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded. There, in the rain-soaked garden his wife had loved, they prayed together. Not elegant prayers, but honest ones, about loss and guilt, about second chances and healing, about learning to trust again, in God and in themselves. As dawn broke the next morning, Diego heard singing from the garden. He found Summer there, wringing rainwater from her hair as she worked, her voice lifting in an old hymn he remembered from childhood. She was muddy and disheveled, but her face shone with a joy he recognized, the same peace he'd seen in Elena's face when she worked in this garden. For the first time in 2 years, Diego smiled without feeling the weight of grief. The garden would grow again, and maybe, just maybe, their hearts would too. Martha found them later that morning, Summer teaching Diego how to properly transplant seedlings, both of them covered in mud and laughing like children. She shook her head fondly and went to make extra coffee. Some storms, she thought, brought more than just rain. They brought renewal. The lake sparkled in the morning sun, waves lapping gently at the shore. In Elena's garden, new life was taking root, nurtured by hands that understood both loss and hope. And in 2 wounded hearts, something fresh and green was beginning to grow. The crisp autumn morning painted Lake Geneva in shades of gold and crimson. Summer sat on the mansion's wide porch, wrapped in a thick blanket Diego had insisted she keep. Her fingers trembled as she held the letter that had arrived that morning, its Chicago postmark bringing memories flooding back. "Dear Summer," the letter began in familiar handwriting. "I can't live with this anymore. What happened to Marcus wasn't your fault. It wasn't Sarah's either." She read on, her heart pounding against her ribs. The letter was from Janet, a former colleague who'd worked as a senior nurse at the hospital. Page after page detailed how their supervisor, Patricia Morton, had deliberately altered medication records to cover up her own negligence. Patricia had been jealous of Summer's rapid rise and popularity with both patients and staff. "She knew you would take the blame to protect Sarah," Janet wrote. "She counted on your kindness, used it against you. I've attached copies of the original records she thought she'd destroyed. I'm so sorry I didn't speak up sooner. The guilt has been eating at me." Summer's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the papers. Footsteps on the porch made her look up. Diego stood there, concern etched on his face. "You're crying," he said softly. She hadn't even noticed the tears. I got a letter." Her voice cracked. "From Chicago." Diego sat beside her, giving her space but close enough to offer support. She handed him the letter, watching as his expression changed from curiosity to anger as he read. "This is everything we need," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "My legal team can have your name cleared within weeks. We can prove your innocence, restore your nursing license." He pulled out his phone. "I'll call them right now." "Wait." Summer's quiet word stopped him. I need time to think." Diego frowned. Think about what? This woman destroyed your life, Summer. She let you take the fall for her mistake. She watched you lose everything. Summer stood, walking to the porch railing. The lake stretched before her, its surface rippling with tiny waves. Patricia has 3 children, she said softly. 2 in college, 1 still in high school. Her husband died last year. Cancer. She's all they have. Summer. Diego's voice held a warning note. She turned to face him, her eyes full of tears but her voice steady. If she's exposed, she'll lose her family, her job, everything. Maybe my silence is what I owe. Owe? Diego stood abruptly. You owe her nothing. She stole your career, your reputation. She let you end up homeless while she kept her comfortable life. And how would destroying her life fix any of that? Summer asked quietly. Diego ran a hand through his hair in frustration. This isn't about destroying her life. It's about justice, about truth. Truth without compassion is just another kind of violence. Summer whispered, I learned that on the streets. Sometimes mercy matters more than justice. They stood in tense silence, the autumn wind rustling through fallen leaves. Finally, Diego spoke. At least let me have my team look into options. There might be a way to clear your name without... But Summer was already shaking her head. Guilt doesn't wash away by ruining someone else. She said firmly, I won't trade my peace for her destruction. Diego watched helplessly as she gathered the letters and walked inside. He stood on the porch long after she'd gone, struggling with emotions he couldn't quite name. That night, sleep eluded him. He tossed and turned, his mind full of Summer's words and the weight of unspoken pain. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of Elena. She stood in her garden, more vibrant than he'd seen her in years before her death. Sunlight caught in her hair as she tended to her beloved roses. You're trying so hard to fix everything, she said, not looking up from her work. Just like you tried with me. I failed you, Diego whispered. Elena finally turned to face him, her eyes gentle. No, my love. You couldn't save me because I had to learn to save myself, just like you can't force Summer's healing to follow your timeline. But the truth is, she's choosing grace over vengeance. Forgive her for that choice, Diego. And while you're at it... Elena's smile was sad and sweet. Forgive yourself too. He woke with tears on his face, and Elena's words echoing in his mind. As dawn painted the sky in gentle pastels, he made his decision. Over breakfast, he watched Summer tend to the potted herbs she'd started growing in the kitchen window. She moved with quiet grace, humming softly as she worked. The sight made his chest ache with something that felt dangerously like love. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about the letter. Summer's hand stilled on the basil leaves. Diego, please, let me finish, he said gently. You're right, revenge isn't the answer, but your story deserves to be told. Not as a scandal or an exposé, but as a testament to grace. He pulled out his phone and showed her the email he'd drafted to Maria Santiago, a respected journalist known for her balanced reporting. We tell the truth about what happened, but we focus on redemption, not retribution. No names except yours, no accusations, just facts. Let people see that sometimes the greatest strength lies in choosing mercy. Summer read the draft, tears filling her eyes. You'd do that? Find a way to clear my name without causing more pain? Yes. Diego smiled softly. Someone very wise recently showed me that healing doesn't have to come at someone else's expense. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something new in his face. A softness that hadn't been there before, a peace that reminded her of early morning light on still waters. Thank you, she whispered. Diego reached across the table and took her hand. Together they watched the sun rise over the lake, its light turning the water to liquid gold. In the garden outside, Elena's roses swayed gently in the morning breeze, their blooms reaching toward the promise of a new day. The weight of truth still hung in the air between them, but it felt lighter somehow, transformed by grace into something that could heal rather than harm. And in that moment, both Summer and Diego understood that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones that choose mercy over justice, healing over harm, and the quiet power of forgiveness over the loud demands of vengeance. 3 weeks passed like a gentle stream, each day bringing small victories and quiet healing. The grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel hummed with activity as staff members hung crystal chandeliers and draped silk banners for the annual Youth Empowerment Gala. Summer worked methodically, arranging white roses in crystal vases. Her hands moved with practiced grace, though her heart thundered at being back in the same lobby where her journey with Diego had begun. She wore the hotel's standard black uniform, now pressed and proper, but her mind drifted to those desperate days when she'd huddled here in donated clothes. "Those look beautiful," Diego's voice came from behind her. He stood in his tuxedo, hands in his pockets, watching her work with quiet appreciation. "Thank you," she said softly, adjusting a bloom. "The roses remind me of your wife's garden." Diego nodded, his eyes distant for a moment. Elena would have loved this. She always said charity events should feel less like business and more like love in action. Summer finished, remembering the phrase from Elena's Bible. Just then, Marcus, Diego's assistant, rushed over with panic etched on his face. "Mr. Langford, we have a serious problem. The keynote speaker just cancelled. Food poisoning. I completely forgot to book a backup, and the program starts in 2 hours." Diego's brow furrowed as he scrolled through his contacts. "Every speaker I know needs at least a day's notice." Summer continued arranging flowers, trying to make herself invisible as they problem-solved. But something tugged at her heart, a whisper of courage she'd been cultivating these past months. "I could—" she started, then fell silent, embarrassed by her boldness. Diego turned to her. "You could what?" She took a deep breath. "I could share my story, not the details that would identify anyone, just what it means to be invisible, to be seen again, to find grace." Diego studied her for a long moment, his eyes softening. "Are you sure? There will be over 300 people here tonight." Summer's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted another rose. "No, but sometimes the things that terrify us most are exactly what we're meant to do." "She's right," Marcus interjected, already typing on his tablet. "We'll list her as anonymous guest speaker, a story of second chances. It's perfect for the youth empowerment theme." 2 hours later, the ballroom filled with Chicago's elite. Summer stood in the kitchen, her heart racing as she helped plate appetizers. The regular staff treated her differently now, with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They'd seen the change in her, watched her grow from a desperate stranger into someone who carried herself with quiet dignity. "Summer?" a soft voice called. She turned to find Maria, the head of housekeeping, holding a large garment bag. "This just arrived for you, from Valentina DeMarco's studio." Summer's eyes widened. Valentina DeMarco was Chicago's most celebrated designer. Inside the bag hung a gown of midnight blue silk, simple but elegant, with a note that read, "For the woman whose words will touch hearts tonight. Every story deserves the right costume." "But I can't," Summer protested. "Mr. Langford arranged it," Maria explained with a gentle smile. "He said you shouldn't have to tell your story in a server's uniform." Tears pricked Summer's eyes as she touched the soft fabric. An hour later, she stood transformed. The gown fit perfectly, making her feel both beautiful and strong. Her natural hair was styled simply but elegantly, and someone had lent her a pair of pearl earrings. The ballroom lights dimmed as Diego took the stage. "Tonight's speaker knows firsthand what it means to fall through society's cracks," he began. "She also knows the power of a single act of kindness to change a life forever. Please welcome a woman who has taught me more about grace than anyone I've ever known." Summer's legs felt like water as she walked to the podium. But when she looked out at the sea of faces, she felt an unexpected calm settle over her. "3 months ago I was invisible," she began softly. "I slept in shelters when I could, doorways when I couldn't. I cleaned bathrooms for quarters and lived on vending machine crackers. But the hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was believing I deserved nothing better." The room fell absolutely silent as she continued. "Then one night, I tried to clean up a spilled drink in a hotel lobby, just to feel useful. Instead of being thrown out, I was seen. Really seen. And that moment changed everything." She spoke for 15 minutes, weaving her story carefully to protect identities, while revealing deep truths about shame, redemption, and the courage to accept help. When she described the first morning she'd watched the sunrise without fear, several people wiped away tears. "So when you look at the young people you're here to support tonight," she concluded, "please remember, they don't need your pity. They need your vision. They need you to see past their circumstances to their worth, because sometimes being truly seen is the first step toward believing you deserve to be visible." The applause was thunderous. As Summer stepped down from the podium, she saw Diego watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. Waiters circulated with champagne as the orchestra began to play. Summer started to drift back toward the kitchen, but Diego caught her hand. "Dance with me?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "People will talk." "Let them," he smiled. "Sometimes the best stories start with people talking." He led her onto the dance floor just as the orchestra began playing Moon River. Summer felt weightless as they moved together, her blue silk skirt swirling around their feet. The chandeliers sparkled overhead like stars brought down to earth, and the music wrapped around them like a blessing. "You were amazing up there," Diego murmured. "I was terrified," she admitted. "That's what made it beautiful. Real courage isn't fearlessness. It's moving forward anyway." They turned slowly, and Summer caught glimpses of other couples watching them. But for once, she didn't feel judged or out of place. The shame that had been her constant companion for so long felt distant, replaced by something that felt remarkably like belonging. "Thank you," she whispered. "For the dress, for believing in me, for—" She struggled to find the words. "For seeing you?" Diego's voice was gentle. "Yes, but more than that, for teaching me to see myself again." The orchestra's notes floated around them like prayer. In that moment, surrounded by light and music and the warm certainty of Diego's arms, Summer felt the full weight of her transformation. She wasn't just visible now, she was radiant, whole, restored. They danced until the song ended, neither wanting to break the spell. When the final notes faded, Diego kept hold of her hand for just a moment longer. In his eyes, Summer saw not the powerful businessman or the grieving widower, but simply a man who had found his own healing in the act of helping someone else heal. The moment felt holy, as if all the brokenness and beauty of their journey had led them here, to this dance, this night, this grace made visible in crystal light and midnight silk. The magical evening began to wind down as the orchestra played their final set. Summer's feet ached pleasantly from dancing, and her heart felt full to bursting. She'd never imagined she'd be here, in this glittering ballroom, wearing a designer gown, having just moved hundreds of wealthy donors to tears with her story. As waiters cleared champagne glasses and guests gathered their wraps, Summer noticed movement at the back of the room. Her blood ran cold. There, by the service entrance, stood Janet Morris, her former nursing supervisor. The woman's face was flushed with anger, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. Before Summer could react, Janet's voice cut through the gentle murmur of departing guests. "How dare you stand up there and play the victim?" The remaining guests turned, phones already raised to capture the drama. Summer felt her knees go weak as Janet stalked toward her, designer heels clicking against marble. "You're nothing but a manipulative liar," Janet spat. "I supervised you at County General. You were negligent with medications, endangered patients, and then tried to blame others when you got caught." Summer's throat closed up. The beautiful dress suddenly felt like a costume, marking her as an imposter. She saw phones recording, heard the whispers starting. "And now you're here, seducing some billionaire with your sob story?" Janet's laugh was cruel. "I guess the streets taught you some useful skills after all." "That's enough." Diego's voice cut through the tension like steel. He stepped between Summer and Janet, his face thunderous. "Security, please escort this woman out." But the damage was done. As security led the struggling Janet away, she shouted, "Check her record! She killed a child!" The room erupted in shocked whispers. Summer saw faces that had been warm with sympathy just moments ago turn cold with judgment. Phones kept recording, and she knew that by morning this scene would be everywhere. She fled to her room, tears blurring her vision. The beautiful gown suddenly felt like it was suffocating her. With trembling hands, she changed back into her simple clothes and began to pack her few belongings. Throughout the night, her phone buzzed with notifications. Social media was exploding with video clips and speculation. Gold digger cons Chicago's most eligible widower. Homeless woman's dark past exposed. Langford Holdings stock drops amid scandal. By 3 a.m, Summer knew what she had to do. She couldn't let Diego's reputation suffer because of her. His charitable foundation did too much good work to be tainted by association with her. She found a piece of hotel stationery and began to write. "Dear Diego, when I was at my lowest, you saw me as clean when I couldn't see it myself. You offered me not just shelter, but dignity. That gift means more than I can ever express. But I won't let my past destroy everything you've built. Your work helps too many people. I know what it's like to lose everything. I won't be the reason you face that pain. Thank you for teaching me that I'm not defined by my mistakes. Thank you for showing me what true grace looks like. Please don't look for me. I'll be okay. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is walk away. With eternal gratitude, Summer." She placed the letter on his desk, alongside the pearl earrings she'd borrowed. Outside, rain began to fall, the same cold Chicago rain that had soaked her the night she'd first stumbled into his hotel. Dawn was just breaking as she shouldered her backpack and slipped out the service entrance. The rain mixed with her tears as she walked away from the only place that had felt like home in years. Back in his office, Diego found the letter. He stood at his window, watching the rain trace patterns on the glass, holding Summer's words in hands that suddenly felt empty. The same rain that had brought her to him was now washing her away. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Board members, reporters, crisis management teams, all demanding answers. But he couldn't focus on any of it. All he could think about was how the ballroom had looked last night, full of light and hope, and how quickly darkness could return. The letter trembled in his hands as he read it again. Outside, the rain continued to fall, each drop an echo of loss. The grand hallways of the Lake Geneva mansion echoed with emptiness. 3 weeks had passed since Summer's departure, and Diego Langford found himself drifting through rooms that suddenly felt too large, too quiet. Her absence hung in the air like a tangible thing, making even familiar spaces feel strange and hollow. In his office, papers lay untouched on his desk. Financial reports and charity proposals blurred before his eyes. The letter, her letter, sat in the top drawer, its edges worn from countless readings. Each night, as darkness settled over the lake, he would take it out, tracing the careful handwriting with his fingers. "Mr. Langford?" His assistant's voice startled him from his thoughts. "The board meeting starts in 5 minutes." "Cancel it," he said, not turning from the window. "Reschedule for next week." "Sir, this is the 3rd time I said reschedule." His tone left no room for argument. The staff had learned to move carefully around him, avoiding any mention of Summer's name. They whispered among themselves when they thought he couldn't hear, sharing concerned glances as he wandered the grounds late at night. The garden she had tended was beginning to show signs of neglect again, weeds pushing through the soil she had so carefully prepared. Each evening, he found himself in the same routine. After a dinner he barely tasted, he would retreat to his study with her letter. "Thank you for seeing me clean," he read aloud to the empty room, hearing her voice in the words. Sometimes he fell asleep there, the paper clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Miles away, in a small Illinois town called Millbrook, Summer, now known as Grace, wiped down tables in the Sunshine Diner. The bell above the door chimed constantly as the dinner rush began, filling the small space with the scent of coffee and conversation. "Order up, Grace," called Mabel, the owner, sliding 2 plates of meatloaf across the counter. Summer had found refuge here 3 weeks ago, exhausted and desperate. Mabel, a widow in her 60s with kind eyes and no questions, had offered her the tiny apartment above the diner in exchange for work. The room was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over Main Street. But to Summer, it felt like sanctuary. "You're good with the customers," Mabel commented one evening as they closed up. "Got a gentle way about you." Summer managed a small smile, careful to keep her story vague. "I used to work with people, before." At night, after her shift ended, she would sit cross-legged on her bed with a dollar store notebook. Each entry began the same way. "Dear God, thank you for keeping me safe another day." She wrote about the customers she'd served, the small kindnesses she witnessed, and always ended with gratitude for Diego's compassion. "Thank you for sending him when I needed reminding that good people exist," she wrote one night, her pen pausing over the paper. "Please let him know I'm okay." During her off hours, she began volunteering at New Hope Women's Shelter, 3 blocks from the diner. The familiar smell of industrial cleaner and donated clothes brought back memories of her own desperate nights. She found herself drawn to the women who arrived with that same lost look in their eyes, who called themselves worthless and filthy. "I was there too," she told a young mother one afternoon, helping her sort through donated clothes. "But someone taught me that we're more than our worst moments." The woman looked up, mascara streaked across her cheeks. "How did you stop feeling so dirty?" Summer's throat tightened as she remembered Diego's words. "Someone saw me as clean when I couldn't see it myself." She developed a routine of her own. Mornings at the diner, afternoons at the shelter, evenings with her journal. She kept her head down when news vans rolled through town chasing other stories, and changed the channel whenever Diego's name appeared in headlines. But some nights, when the town grew quiet and even the truckers had left the diner, she would allow herself to remember. The warmth of his kitchen, the peace of his garden, the way he looked at her like she mattered. On her small bedside table, she kept a newspaper clipping from the gala, carefully folded so only the photo of the garden was visible, not the scandal that followed. Next to it sat a small pot of lavender, like the ones she had planted in his wife's garden. "The past is past," she would whisper to herself, echoing Mabel's favourite saying. But in her dreams she still walked through that garden, feeling clean and whole. At the shelter, she threw herself into creating a small vegetable garden behind the building. "Growing things helps heal the soul," she told the residents as they turned the soil together. She didn't mention where she had learned that lesson. The other volunteers noticed her special touch with the most difficult cases, the women who arrived angry and defensive, certain they were beyond help. "Grace has a gift," they would say, not knowing that every gentle word she offered was one she had first heard from Diego. One evening, as rain drummed against her window, she added a postscript to her journal entry. "I hope you're not reading that letter anymore. I hope you're smiling again. I hope you know that helping me wasn't a mistake, even if it ended badly. Some gifts aren't meant to last forever, but that doesn't make them less precious." In his mansion by the lake, Diego stood at his office window, watching the same rain fall. Summer's letter lay open on his desk, its words memorized but still somehow necessary to read. Outside, the garden waited for hands that wouldn't return to tend it. The mansion staff moved quietly through their duties, sharing worried looks as their employer's isolation deepened. His housekeeper had stopped trying to move the letter from his desk while cleaning. His chef no longer bothered asking about his preferences, knowing the meals would go largely untouched. The board had managed to contain most of the scandal, but Diego hardly seemed to notice. His assistant handled the day-to-day operations while he spent hours staring at the garden, lost in thought. "Sir," his butler ventured one evening, "perhaps some company for dinner? I could arrange—" "No." Diego cut him off softly. "Thank you, James, but no." The silence settled back around him like a familiar coat. In the growing darkness, he could almost hear Summer's voice reading scripture in the garden, her quiet laugh echoing through the kitchen, her gentle presence filling the empty spaces that now gaped like wounds. Miles apart, they both watched the same moon rise, each carrying the weight of words unsaid, each wondering if some gifts, though brief, could leave permanent marks on the soul. Winter descended on the small Illinois town like a heavy blanket, bringing biting winds and early darkness. Summer noticed more people huddled in the shelter's common room each night, seeking warmth from the ancient radiators. Their stories were written in chattering teeth and frost-reddened fingers. "We need more blankets," she told Maria, the shelter's director, one evening as they counted their dwindling supplies. "And warm socks. Everyone forgets about socks." The next morning, Summer stood outside the local grocery store with a cardboard sign. "Winter clothing drive for New Hope Women's Shelter." She had wrapped herself in 3 layers, but the cold still crept in. Hour after hour, she greeted shoppers with a smile, explaining their urgent needs. "God bless you, honey," an elderly woman said, pressing 2 pairs of thick wool socks into Summer's hands. "I knitted these myself." By sunset, Summer's collection bins overflowed with coats, sweaters, and mittens. The diner's owner, Mabel, sent over hot coffee and insisted Summer warm up inside. "You'll catch your death out there," Mabel clucked, but her eyes showed pride. Summer organized the donations in the shelter's basement, sorting by size and type. Her nursing training wouldn't let her rest until everything was properly categorized. As she worked, she noticed how many of the women had medical issues they ignored: chronic coughs, untreated infections, dental problems that made eating painful. "We need more than clothes," she told Maria. "These women need basic health care." Working with local medical students and retired nurses, Summer set up monthly health screening days. She carefully avoided using her full name or former credentials, but her knowledge showed in how she organized the sessions. Blood pressure first, she directed volunteers, then temperature and basic health history. Note any immediate concerns for the doctors to review. The screenings revealed what Summer had feared: too many treatable conditions going unchecked. One young mother had dangerously high blood pressure. An elderly woman's diabetes had spiraled out of control. That night, Summer knelt beside her bed, hands clasped tight. "Lord," she whispered, "these women need more than we can give. The shelter's bursting at the seams. We need funds for proper medical care, for repairs, for everything." Her voice caught. "I know I don't deserve to ask for anything, but please help us help them." A week later, Maria burst into the shelter's kitchen, waving a letter. Her hands trembled as she read it aloud. An anonymous donor had pledged $250,000 to support their work. "It's a miracle!" Maria exclaimed, hugging Summer tight. "We can fix the roof, expand the medical program, maybe even add more beds." Summer stood very still, remembering similar letters arriving at other shelters, always anonymous, always precisely what was needed. She thought of Diego's quiet way of solving problems, how he never wanted recognition for his giving. But she pushed the thought away. Chicago was full of wealthy people with guilty consciences. It didn't have to be him. Still, that night she added a note to her journal. "Thank you for teaching me that true giving doesn't need applause." Miles away, Diego sat in his office, facing his board of directors. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the polished conference table. "The offer from Sterling Industries is more than fair," his CFO insisted. "Selling 20% of holdings would give us needed capital for expansion." Diego studied the proposal without expression. The numbers were good, excellent even. But something else caught his eye. Sterling's charitable giving was minimal, focused more on tax benefits than actual impact. "I'll agree," he said finally, "on one condition." The board leaned forward, pens poised. "Sterling must match our donations to women's charities dollar for dollar, not just this year, permanently. It becomes part of their corporate charter." Protests erupted immediately. "That's millions annually." "They'll never agree. It's not practical." Diego held up his hand for silence. "Those are my terms, non-negotiable." 3 days of tense negotiations followed. Sterling's executives argued, threatened to walk away, then finally conceded. The press release announced the deal in glowing terms, a perfect marriage of corporate interests. Only Diego's assistant noticed that the list of charities included several small women's shelters in Illinois. She said nothing when she saw him studying their websites late at night, reading about their programs and needs. Winter deepened. Summer organized Christmas celebrations at the shelter, stringing donated lights and helping children write letters to Santa. Each morning, she checked the weather report and put out extra coffee when snow was coming. Meanwhile, Diego attended holiday galas alone, writing checks that would arrive in shelter mailboxes with no name attached. At each event, he deflected questions about his personal life with practiced ease. Mr. Langford's philanthropic interests remain focused on women's health and safety, his PR team would say. No one needed to know he spent hours researching small shelters' needs, or that he had set up a special foundation just to handle anonymous giving. One particularly cold night, Summer sat with a new arrival at the shelter, a young woman who reminded her painfully of herself a year ago. "I used to think I was too broken to fix," Summer told her softly. "But sometimes help comes from unexpected places. Sometimes God sends angels in business suits." That same evening, Diego stood in his garden, now covered in snow. The lavender plants Summer had tended were dormant, waiting for spring. He thought of all the women seeking warmth in shelters across the country. and how many of them probably felt as lost as she once had. "Keep them safe," he whispered to the night sky. "Keep her safe." In their separate corners of the world, they continued their work, one organizing donations and bandaging wounds, the other signing checks and making deals. Neither knew they were still connected by threads of compassion, still doing the same holy work in different ways. The winter winds blew cold, but in shelters across Illinois, women slept warm under new blankets, their children's coughs treated, their futures a little less uncertain. And in that warmth, Grace continued its quiet work of healing, anonymous, unannounced, but real as the snow falling outside. The March wind whistled through the streets of Millbrook, Illinois, carrying the first hints of spring. Diego Langford adjusted his tie as he stepped out of the black SUV, his security team scanning the modest community center that would host today's Rural Healthcare Initiative conference. Inside, volunteers bustled about, setting up folding chairs and hanging welcome banners. Diego nodded politely as the conference organizer, Dr. Matthews, led him through the building's winding halls. "We're particularly proud of our partnership with the local women's clinic," Dr. Matthews explained, gesturing toward a connecting hallway. "They've done remarkable work with limited resources." Diego listened with practiced attention, though his mind wandered. These small-town conferences had become part of his routine over the past months, a way to ensure his charitable investments reached the right places. Yet something felt different today. The air held an expectancy he couldn't explain. "Would you like to see the clinic facilities?" Dr. Matthews asked. "They're just through here." Diego followed him down the freshly painted corridor. Sunlight streamed through high windows, casting warm patches on the linoleum floor. The clinic's waiting room was modest but welcoming, with cheerful posters and well-worn magazines scattered on side tables. Then he heard it, a laugh, soft, genuine, achingly familiar. It drifted from around the corner, stopping him mid-step. His heart seemed to pause between beats. He knew that laugh, had heard it over garden dirt and morning coffee, during quiet moments when grief gave way to healing. Dr. Matthews continued talking, but Diego barely registered the words. He moved forward as if drawn by an invisible thread, following the sound of gentle conversation. And there she was. Summer Brown stood at the nurse's station, wearing a simple blue cardigan over dark slacks. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and reading glasses perched on her nose as she bent over some paperwork with a patient. She looked healthy, confident, at peace in a way he'd always hoped she'd find. "It's just a few forms," she was saying softly to the nervous woman beside her. "Take your time. There's no rush." Diego watched as she pointed out various sections of the document, her movements patient and sure. This was Summer in her element, the nurse she'd always been, helping those who needed gentle guidance. When she looked up, their eyes met across the space between them. Time seemed to stop, holding them both in that moment of recognition. The clipboard slipped from Summer's fingers, clattering against the counter. Color drained from her face, then rushed back in a flood. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Diego took a step forward, then another. Dr. Matthews was saying something about introductions, but neither of them heard him. "Mr. Langford," Summer managed finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect—" "Neither did I," Diego said quietly. He glanced at the frightened patient, then back to Summer. "Please, finish what you're doing. I'll wait." Summer nodded gratefully, turning back to the woman beside her. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the scattered papers, but her voice remained steady and kind as she completed the intake process. Diego stood to the side, watching her work. She'd always had this gift, the ability to put others at ease, to make them feel seen and valued. It was one of the first things he'd noticed about her, even when she'd been at her lowest. When the patient had been guided to the examination area, Summer turned back to face him. They stood in silence for a long moment, the air heavy with unspoken words. "Would you like to walk outside?" Diego asked finally. "It's a beautiful day." Summer nodded, touching her throat where a simple silver cross hung on a chain. "Let me just tell them I'm taking my break." They walked through the clinic's side door into a small courtyard. Early spring flowers pushed through the soil in carefully tended beds, crocuses and snowdrops, brave against the lingering chill. "You look well," Diego said softly. "I am well," Summer replied. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from the surge of emotions. "The clinic. They took me on part-time at first, then full-time once they checked my references. They didn't care about the old headlines. They just saw me." Diego smiled. "Like someone else we know?" That drew a laugh from her, the same laugh that had stopped him in his tracks. "Yes, like someone else." They walked slowly along the garden path. A bench sat beneath a budding maple tree, and by unspoken agreement, they settled onto it. "I've been following your work," Diego said after a moment. "The shelter programs, the medical outreach, the education initiatives, all those anonymous donations showing up just when needed." Summer turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I knew it was you. I mean, I hoped. But I didn't want to assume. I've been donating to a woman who doesn't need saving anymore," Diego said simply. "Who's doing the saving herself now?" The tears spilled over then, tracking silently down Summer's cheeks. "I never stopped praying for you," she whispered. "Every night I asked God to give you peace, to help you find purpose in your pain, like you helped me find in mine." "I have found peace," Diego admitted. "Watching from afar as you rebuilt your life, it helped me understand what Elena was trying to tell me all along, that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone find their own way back to light." Summer reached out hesitantly, touching his hand where it rested on the bench between them. "You never stopped believing in my worth, even when I ran away." "How could I?" Diego turned his hand over, clasping her fingers gently. "You showed me what true courage looks like, what forgiveness means, what grace feels like." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as clouds drifted across the spring sky. Around them, the garden stirred with new life, tender shoots reaching toward sunlight, buds swelling with promise. "Will you tell me about your work here?" Diego asked finally. "Everything you've been doing?" Summer's face lit up with passion as she began to speak about the clinic's programs, the women she'd helped, the lives being transformed. Diego listened, drinking in her words, seeing how she'd taken her own healing and multiplied it 1,000-fold. The morning passed in gentle conversation, neither rushing to move from that peaceful moment. They had both traveled so far from that rainy night in Chicago, from the woman who thought herself filthy and the man who built walls of wealth against pain. Now they sat in spring sunshine, two souls who had learned that sometimes the greatest miracles work quietly, like seeds pushing through soil toward light. In the weeks that followed their reunion, Summer and Diego found themselves drawn into a shared vision that was bigger than either of them had imagined. The idea for the Langford Brown Free Clinic sprouted from their morning conversations over coffee, where Summer spoke passionately about the women she'd met who couldn't afford basic health care. "What if we could do more?" Diego asked one morning, spreading blueprints across the diner's worn table. "Not just emergency care, but real, ongoing support?" Summer's eyes widened as she studied the plans. "A dedicated clinic, For homeless women and children? And you'll train the volunteers, Diego said softly. Who better to teach compassion than someone who's walked both sides of the street? The community's response surprised them both. Local contractors offered discounted services, medical suppliers donated equipment, retired nurses volunteered their time. Even the diner where Summer had found refuge began providing free meals to clinic volunteers. In the shell of an old warehouse, Summer directed teams of workers with gentle authority. She'd learned leadership not from textbooks, but from understanding what it meant to need help and dignity in equal measure. The intake area needs to feel welcoming, she explained to the construction crew. These women are carrying enough shame already. We want them to feel safe from the moment they walk in. Diego watched from the doorway, amazed at how naturally she commanded respect, not through power or position, but through the quiet strength of someone who had found her purpose. They worked side by side, Diego handling the business aspects, while Summer developed patient care protocols. Their partnership flowed with an ease that felt both new and familiar, like a song they'd always known but were just learning to sing. One rainy afternoon, as they sorted through medical supplies, Summer discovered a letter that had been delivered with the mail. Her hands shook as she read it. It's from her, she whispered. My former supervisor. Diego moved closer, protective instinct rising. What does she want? Summer's voice trembled as she read aloud. To the State Medical Board. I, Margaret Wheeler, hereby confess to falsifying records and wrongfully accusing Summer Brown of negligence. The letter continued, detailing the full truth of what had happened that tragic night. She's clearing your name, Diego said softly. Officially. Summer pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely. After all this time. They stood together in the half-finished clinic, surrounded by boxes and building materials, as Diego read the rest of the confession letter aloud. Each word seemed to lift another weight from Summer's shoulders. The next day, they worked on painting the clinic's sign together. Summer's steady hand traced the letters, while Diego held the ladder steady. The spring breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. You're clean, Diego whispered, looking up at her as she put the finishing touches on the word clinic. You always were. Summer paused, brush hovering mid-stroke. Her eyes met his, filled with understanding of all the healing they'd both found. So are you, she answered softly. Their love had grown like Elena's garden, slowly, naturally, nurtured by shared purpose and quiet faith. It wasn't the passionate romance of movies or novels, but something deeper. Something built on mutual respect, understanding, and the kind of grace that comes from seeing someone at their lowest and believing in their highest. The clinic became more than just a building. It became a symbol of what could happen when broken people chose to help heal others. Summer's gentle strength and Diego's resources combined to create something neither could have achieved alone. Local media covered the clinic's development, but this time the headlines were different. Former nurse and businessman partner to serve community, and healthcare heroes bring hope to homeless. As opening day approached, Summer and Diego often found themselves working late into the evening, sharing simple meals and comfortable silence. Their conversations meandered between practical details and deeper matters of faith, healing, and purpose. Elena would have loved this, Diego said one night as they reviewed patient forms. She always said true charity wasn't about money. It was about restoring dignity. Summer reached across the desk and squeezed his hand. She still does love it. Through you. The Langford Brown Free Clinic opened its doors on a bright morning in late spring. As Summer welcomed the first patients and Diego handled the administrative details, they caught each other's eyes across the busy waiting room. In that glance was everything they'd learned about redemption, that it often comes through serving others, that love grows best in the soil of shared purpose, and that sometimes the greatest healing happens in the quiet spaces between two hearts that understand both brokenness and grace. The morning of the grand opening dawned clear and bright, with sunlight streaming through the clinic's newly installed windows. Hundreds of people gathered outside, community members, healthcare workers, local officials, and many faces Summer recognized from her time at the women's shelter. Inside, Summer stood in the staff room, smoothing her simple navy dress with trembling hands. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, making her breath catch. "You ready?" Diego appeared in the doorway, looking distinguished in his charcoal suit. She managed a small nod. "I think so. I just never imagined I'd be here, speaking to all these people." "They need to hear your story," Diego said gently. "It might help someone else find their way back." The main reception area had been transformed for the ceremony. Rows of chairs filled the space where examination rooms would soon see patients. Sunlight poured through windows that Summer had personally cleaned just yesterday, catching the brass letters of the clinic's name on the wall. As Summer approached the podium, she saw familiar faces from every chapter of her journey. The kind housekeeper who'd given her that first bar of soap, volunteers from the shelter, even some of the construction workers who'd helped build this place. Diego sat in the front row, his presence steady and reassuring. Her hands shook as she adjusted the microphone, but when she began to speak, her voice carried clear and strong. "A few months ago I was washing my hands in a gas station sink, believing I was filthy inside and out." She paused, meeting the eyes of those gathered. "I had lost everything. My career, my home, my sense of worth. But that night, through a series of events that could only be God's doing, I met someone who saw past all that." Summer's gaze found Diego's, drawing strength from his encouraging smile. "What I've learned since then is something I want every person who walks through these doors to understand. Love, real love, doesn't wash you clean. It shows you that you were never the dirt to begin with." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several people dabbed at their eyes with tissues. "This clinic isn't just about providing medical care, though that's vital. It's about restoring dignity. It's about showing people their true worth, regardless of their circumstances. Because sometimes the deepest healing happens when someone simply sees you as you really are." The audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the room. Many were openly weeping now, moved by the raw honesty in her words. Summer stood at the podium, overwhelmed by the response, until Diego stepped up beside her. As the crowd mingled and explored the facility, Diego led Summer outside to the garden they'd planted along the clinic's western wall. Elena's favorite lilies bloomed there, their white petals catching the golden light of sunset. The flowers had been transplanted from the Lake Geneva estate, creating a bridge between past and present, between loss and new beginnings. Summer breathed in the sweet fragrance, remembering how far she'd come from that rainy night at the hotel. "You gave me a room when I had none," she said softly, watching the sky paint itself in shades of amber and rose. "Now God's given us a purpose." Diego took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. The gesture spoke of partnership, of shared understanding, of two paths converging into one. Together they walked back towards the crowd gathering near the clinic's entrance, not as billionaire and outcast, but as two souls finally clean in heart, in purpose, and in grace. The sunset gilded the clinic's windows, casting long shadows across the new sign they'd painted together. In that moment, they were simply two people who had found healing in helping others, who had discovered that sometimes the greatest acts of grace come through the most broken vessels. They rejoined the celebration, their linked hands a quiet testament to the power of second chances and the endless possibilities of redemption. The crowd welcomed them back with warm smiles and congratulations, seeing not the labels society had once given them, but the pure hearts that had emerged from their shared journey of healing. The clinic stood as their legacy, not just of wealth or service, but of the transformative power of love that sees beyond circumstances to the true worth within. As day faded into evening, the building glowed with promise, ready to become a sanctuary for others seeking their own path to wholeness. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.